The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump has a real problem with black people. Even though he recently said he would win the black vote, he's actually polling somewhere between 1% and 2%, statistically zero in some individual states. A recent poll in Ohio had Trump polling zero. Now, Lewis, that doesn't mean no black people are voting for Trump in Ohio. What it means is statistically it didn't even make it to 1% in the poll, and that's bad enough.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it'll happen, but I'm hoping at some point he'll reach negative 1 or 2% with the black vote.
So Trump decides to go after the black vote. He's going to court the black vote. And like most things in the Donald Trump campaign, he seems to end up doing the opposite of what's logical. He decided to go make an appeal to the black vote in front of yet another mostly white crowd and just said untruth after untruth about black people. I don't know that Trump said anything accurate about black people in this speech, other than the fact that he seemed to acknowledge them as black people, right? He seems to be talking about them as if they are part of Homo sapiens. That's the only relatively accurate thing in the entire discussion here. I will play the clip for you. This is Trump speaking in Diamondale, Michigan, which is 96.4% white, and he made a horribly misinformed appeal to black people. Take a look.
What do you have to lose by trying something new like Trump? What do you have to lose?
Right. Wow.
I think I see a black woman.
I say it again. What do you have to lose? Look, what do you have to lose? You're living in poverty. Your schools are no good.
Oh.
You have no jobs. 58% of your youth is unemployed.
Right.
What the hell do you have to lose?
He then doubled down on the insane, going on the Jeanine Pirro show on Fox News, which we could do a couple hours on that show alone. I mean, that show is insane. So he goes on one of the most heinous and depraved shows on one of the most heinous and depraved networks, and it's totally Looney Tunes. He said black people have no education either. Take a listen.
Of them, and it was in my speech, and I really sort of just was reading the statistics where you have 40% that are living in poverty, 58% of the students, I mean, the young people, they can't get jobs. And, it's just like a total catastrophe. The unemployment rates, everything is bad. No health care, no education, no anything. And poverty is unbelievable. And then I said, hey, wait a minute. Vote for me. What do you have to lose? I can't do worse. You can't do any worse than what these people have been doing, and I will do better. And actually said that if you vote for me the next time in 4 years, I'll get 95% of your vote because you're going to see such a big improvement.
When you say you're living in poverty, you're clearly implying or saying that poverty is something that afflicts most or a majority of the group, in this particular case, black Americans. Otherwise, why would you say it that way? Yes, black Americans have a higher than average poverty rate, around a quarter compared to 10% overall. But he's saying that, basically poverty is just, most black people are poor, so why not vote for me? He said black people are sending kids to failing schools as if that's the fault of black people, that schools in disproportionately black areas have problems. In fact, Trump, part of his platform is to take away federal funding from education, which would only make those so-called black schools be even worse off.
Yeah, well, it's part of the whole Donald Trump thing that I can improve everything.
Yeah.
Everything will be better under me. And just telling people that they're completely destitute and have absolutely nothing to lose doesn't seem like the best strategy.
When you say you have no jobs, you're clearly implying or saying that unemployment is something that afflicts most or a majority of black Americans. Otherwise, again, why would you say it? And yes, unemployment is higher among black Americans as it is among Hispanic Americans. In terms of black Americans, it's roughly double the national unemployment rate. But it seems, Jason, like Donald Trump doesn't know that most black people are not poor and most black people have jobs. I mean, it's like a caricature of the population that he seems to be focusing on here.
Well, I guess when you say your message is, well, it just can't get any worse, try me. I mean, that pretty much says it all to me right there.
You have to sort of outline a caricature of how things are if your message is, I can't possibly be worse than where things are right now, because that's you're depending on things being a disaster in order for that to appeal to anybody.
Yeah. It's and certainly this is a disastrous place we're in right now, but who really thinks that Donald Trump is going to turn things around?
For black people, as he says, if you believe Trump statistics, the next question becomes, how will Trump's policies on, for example, healthcare or funding for education or his view on voting rights, none of those positions will at all help the black American community. Trump says, well, we need to create job opportunities. I agree with that. The problem is his policies won't actually do that. Okay, after this totally abortive attempt at outreach by Donald Trump to black voters, where he basically said, hey, you're all poor. None of you are working. You all have crappy schools, right? That was Trump attempting to reach out to black people. After that, the surrogates, the advisors, the supporters, they start popping up on news media trying to defend what he said. Now, sometimes merely needing an explainer is bad. Like, for example, remember last week, maybe the week before, when Donald Trump sort of implied, hey, maybe my supporters could kill Hillary Clinton if she's elected. And then all the surrogates show up, Lewis, and they start saying, oh, no, what he was trying to do is mobilize the Second Amendment vote. Really? Then why did he say if Hillary wins, right? Because if you're trying to mobilize the vote, you don't give suggestions for what should happen after the vote is done. Okay, anyway, just having people explaining away an implicit suggestion that people should kill your opponent, that's a loss to begin with. So on CNN, Breonna Keeler is interviewed by former Georgia Republican Congressman Jack Kingston, who is totally cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Okay, I mean, we're talking about it's bad. And he shows up and he was asked by Breonna Keeler a very sensible question, which is, Trump goes to these white cities, right? 96.4% white, Diamondale, Michigan. And he makes a bizarre appeal to black people. Is this the best thing to do? Listen to how Kingston responds to this. It is utter insanity.
A proposal. He's saying, you know what? I'm interested. I went to Milwaukee. I'm here tonight. I want to talk to you. And one of the things he actually said last night in North Carolina that kind of went uncovered, but he said, I don't want to preside over another generation of children who are left out of the American dream. I have to stop you just because you say he's going there. He's not. He's in Diamondale, which is 93% white. When he was in Milwaukee the other day, it was a part of Milwaukee that wasn't dealing. I mean, it's but Breonna, it's almost completely white. I mean, maybe it would have been nice if he went and had a backdrop with a burning car, but the reality is... No. Look, I'm not talking about a burning car. I'm talking about meeting with black voters. Well, he met with David Clark, who, as you know, is the African-American sheriff of Milwaukee, and he's engaged with him. And
we have to just call this as completely racist or racialist pandering to white voters who maintain this caricature that I guess what is being implied here, that the sort of natural scenario that we should be used to seeing black people relate to is cars burning and sort of this imagery of riotous looting and insanity. I mean, the right is going crazy saying, if you see racism in what Kingston said, you're the racist. No, sometimes pointing out that someone else is appealing to racist stereotypes is not racist. And this is one of those cases.
Yeah, the burning car right now is the Donald Trump campaign. And this sounds like the type of rhetoric that Donald Trump would use earlier in his campaign, just to kind of rally white supremacists and racists and people with general xenophobic attitudes.
When I see this, Jason, I actually start thinking, if Trump were really trying to lose the campaign, you'd go out and make a crazy appeal to black people, and then to fix it, you'd send out this guy and you would have him reference black people feeling at home in scenarios where cars are burning in the background. This is what you would be doing if you were trying to throw the election, isn't it?
Pretty much. I'm pretty sure the only thing he knows about black people is like the Los Angeles riots and the videos he's seen of them, and that's where he's going to go with all this.
Well, he has a great relationship with the blacks, Lewis. He's going to win the blacks. He's going to do terrific because the blacks and Trump are going to win again after he goes out there. And of course, trust me, trust me on this, which is his new favorite line, where when you have no data to back up what you're saying, you just say, trust me. Mexico's going to build the wall. Trust me on that, ladies and gentlemen. Believe you me. And that's it. There's nothing to this.
No, I don't see how he's going to get any black people to vote for him. But let's not forget, he does have one black friend, which he referred to as my African American.
Right.
And we saw at one rally. He's got that guy's vote, presumably.
I was sometimes when I see something like this, I try to say, okay, what's an explanation for how this transpired? My explanation is former Congressman Kingston thought they were in a commercial break and didn't realize that this was live television where his comments were going out to air. That's the only way I could rationalize this happening.
Or he thought he was on SNL.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the other possibility. Hey, the chaos continues within the Trump campaign. I told you last week that after replacing fired campaign manager Corey Lewandowski with Russian-connected Paul Manafort as campaign manager, then Paul Manafort was replaced by Republican strategist Kellyanne Conway and the CEO of Breitbart News, Steve Bannon. It was plain to see that Manafort was effectively out. The official line was, oh, he's not the campaign manager, but he's the campaign chairman. He's overseeing everything. It was totally campaign optics BS, and it lasted a few days. Now Donald Trump campaign chairman and former campaign manager Paul Manafort has resigned. Clearly he was fired and told you have to resign. Everything about Manafort's involvement in the Trump campaign has been a disaster. We found out about this history of working for pro-Russian Ukrainian politician Viktor Yanukovych. We had the reports about this handwritten ledger which listed Manafort and his associates as being owed or receiving $12.7 million in under-the-table payments. We found out that Manafort played a really key role in fomenting these pro-annexation sentiments in Crimea. And here is the statement from the Trump campaign, from Donald Trump, about the resignation, quote, of Paul Manafort. This morning, Paul Manafort offered and I accepted his resignation from the campaign. It's good already. I am very appreciative for his great work in helping to get us where we are today, and in particular, his work guiding us through the delegate and convention process. Yeah, real guide. Paul is a true professional, and I wish him the greatest success. The Russia thing was not a non-factor. Politico said that Trump's family was very troubled by the constant reports of Manafort's connection to Russia. And as usual, even within the Trump campaign, people were reportedly surprised by this. No internal communication whatsoever. Same as when Corey Lewandowski was fired. And here's Eric Trump, Donald Trump's son, on Fox News. There is no language here that suggests this was Manafort's idea. It's abundantly clear that Trump fired this guy. Take a look.
I think my father didn't want to be, distracted by, whatever things that, Paul was dealing with. And, Paul was amazing. And, he helped us get through the primary process. He helped us get through the convention. He did a great job with the delegates. Yeah. Now you look at, Kellyanne and some of the other people that we're bringing in, and they're absolutely fantastic. And, I think they're going to be the ones that bring us, all the way through November 8th and ultimately get us the victory. But again, my father just didn't want to have the distraction looming, over the campaign, and quite frankly, looming over all the issues that Hillary's facing right now.
If the storyline is Manafort resigned, Jason, you don't have your kid go on Fox News and explain why Trump didn't want him around, because that narrative immediately falls apart.
Yeah, I think this is more a narrative of a really good, professional, amazing comedy movie. That's what it's the job that they're trying to set themselves up for here with the resume,
Eric Trump is like mini Trump, right? Saying Paul Manafort was amazing and we're bringing in terrific people. It's mirroring everything Trump does.
None of these people are terrific. But yes, he mirrors Trump in just about every way, except for using words. His words are slightly different. I don't think he said terrific, right?
I don't.
Did he?
Now I'm not sure.
I think it was amazing.
He definitely said amazing. I thought he said terrific or fantastic. In normal circumstances, firing 2 campaign managers in under 2 months would be sort of a problem for your campaign. It's not even on the top 5 list of problems for the Trump campaign in the last week because it's so insane over there.
But they are doing a good job at not making it seem, at hiding the fact that the campaign is in total disarray.
Are they? It seems pretty clear.
Well, it might seem clear to us, but
okay.
I mean, they're still operating as normal, and they still have a great deal of support across the country.
Great deal. Well, yeah.
Not as much as before.
There's now one poll of the last 24 where Trump has any lead, and it's a 1-point lead, statistically a tie. So something is happening here, and we've got to figure out, to quote the great Donald Trump, what the hell is going on. We'll take a break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Robert Peterson. You know, Lewis, by this point, that this is viewer-supported media. And because I don't really talk about that too often, some of our viewers might not know. I know it doesn't come up that there is this thing called membership, and people, great people, the best people we put around ourselves, like Robert Peterson, are helping us win again by becoming members at davidpakman.com/membership. And a big thanks to Robert for being today's member of the day. Remember that if you ever shop on Amazon.com, the shopping you do can support the work we do. If first you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon, and I noticed a lot of people from our audience over the last week buying all sorts of different energy drinks, including Amazon offers bulk packs of energy drinks. I still have only ever tried a few sips of Red Bull, and I found it absolutely heinous. Are you into some of these energy drinks, Lewis? These energy shots that are sometimes marketed very aggressively?
No. They're pretty much all terrible for you. I will admit that I like the taste of Red Bull.
Really?
And in very, very, very rarely will I have one.
What would have to be going on for you to say, I'm now going to have a Red Bull? It's complete debauchery, right?
I would have to just, for some reason, I'm exhausted and I have to get up and do stuff. And I just...
Like if, God forbid, you had to go to work or something like that.
Yeah, wow. If my alarm goes off and I have to get up and go to work, I might need that.
Yeah. Have you indulged in these types of drinks, Jason?
I'm actually really excited for this because now I can mass order all those Four Locos I've been drinking. No, that's a joke.
What is Four Loko?
Basically, it is alcohol plus energy drink equals a terrible hangover.
Yeah, I thought it wasn't ideal to combine stimulants and depressants like caffeine and alcohol.
It's not a good idea. I've served many Red Bull and vodka in my day as a bartender. And
usually the orders of those are precipitated or followed by the authorities being brought in, right?
No, not usually. Okay. But just don't drink those.
All right. Well, congratulations to whoever decided to at least save by ordering in bulk. That I respect, even if I'm not into the whole energy shot thing. Remember, davidpakman.com/Amazon. Then anything you buy will support our show. Big news, kind of, or not really, depending on who you talk to. The Justice Department has announced they are no longer going to use or contract with private prisons, period. They did an investigation which turned up the exact same thing that every other investigation into the matter has turned up, which is that private prisons, by and large, are less safe than government-run prisons. They are less effective at providing correctional services, which is almost funny to read. Who thinks prisons are in the business of providing correctional or rehabilitative services at this point, right?
Yeah.
And that it basically just doesn't make sense to contract with private prisons. So that's good news. I like that. The problem is this doesn't apply to that many people because this decision, number one, affects only federal contracts with private prisons. Most prison inmates nationally are not in federal prisons, they're in state prisons, and this decision by the Justice Department does absolutely nothing to impact the fact that state governments are still using private prisons. And the other thing is, we've talked about this many times. I don't know, Jason, if you're aware of this, but people often like to talk about the huge importance of eliminating private prisons. I agree, incarceration should not be for profit, but only about 8 or 9% of inmates nationally are in private prisons. And that's one of those things where, as progressives, we want to inform, and the right position is to be against private prisons. But let's also not overstate how many people are even in private prisons. I don't know if it's shocking to you that only 8 or 9% of inmates are in private prisons.
But 10% of the world's largest prison population, that's still probably a significant number, like even compared to worldwide, that's probably still more prisoners than many people even have.
In raw numbers, there is no doubt that the private prison population of the U.S. rivals the total prison population of many countries, no doubt about it. But let's remember exactly what the scope of this is. So, and lastly, we've talked a little bit, Lewis, about how immigrations enforcement has these deals with private prisons where they will hold people pending deportation or pending hearings in private prisons, and it's a really big moneymaker for the private prisons, this federal decision does not impact immigration's related detention in private prisons. So yes, it's a victory in that it is the right decision. It's a victory in that it might start getting us in the right direction, but it really is impacting a tiny portion of inmates nationally.
Yes, still a good thing though, because these prisons are terrible, and maybe this will eventually lead to some type of federal mandate against private prisons. And I'm sure the thought of a private prison to many people listening in other countries, it just doesn't even make sense.
No doubt about it. Libertarians are sort of split on this. This is one of those issues where libertarians will sometimes split and some will go off to the kooky recesses of the internet. Some libertarians are sort of against the concept of prison. Some of them actually say we should go back to when you commit a crime and you, as the perpetrator, are required to compensate the victim, which basically means if you have a lot of money and you figure out what the price is for a rape, you can say, hey, I can afford 10 rapes a year and I'll just pay people off and that's that. That is one libertarian view. Others are sort of against the prison industrial complex, not because they're opposed to making incarceration for profit per se, if the market will bear it, as they like to say, but because they just think the entire system of how people are brought to justice, the police system, the legal system, it's all totally illegitimate. Those people I also don't agree with. And then you have the more reasonable libertarians who say, you know what, if we are going to take away someone's liberty by imprisoning them, that is such a serious responsibility and big thing for the government. You should never attach a profit motive. That is a libertarian-esque belief that I can actually get behind.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. And if it's justice and that's what we do, right. Let's not have it be for profit. And please read about the conditions in some of these for-profit prisons.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Jason? You seemed like you were anxious to get in there.
I was just going to say, it seems like, I'm not sure where they stand in education, but it seems like, should be the same for many of these things. Education should be nonprofit as well, really.
I've been reading a lot of the comments online and many people reacting to this by saying, great, now let's move on to healthcare and education, two other institutions that should not be made for profit. That's something we've talked about pretty often. I have amazing video of new Republican strategist, the new campaign manager, one of the new campaign managers for Donald Trump, Kellyanne Conway. Before she was working for Trump, she demanded that we see Donald Trump's tax returns. So she goes on TV and she is asked, hey, you called for the release of Donald Trump's tax returns when you weren't running his campaign. Certainly you're standing by that, right, Kellyanne Conway? No, she's not. Take a look at the video.
Let's talk about Donald Trump's tax returns. Back in April, you said on CNN that you want Trump to be transparent.
Right.
Let's listen.
I want to ask you about this alliance between you first, Kellyanne, between John Kasich and Ted Cruz, this alliance, shall we say, that Donald Trump is calling collusion. Is this fair game? Are they playing by the rules here?
Oh, absolutely. It's completely transparent. Donald Trump's tax returns aren't. I'd like to see those be transparent.
Okay, now you're in charge of Donald Trump's campaign. Given that, and given how you feel, are we going to see Donald Trump's tax return soon?
So now that I'm on the inside, I know something I didn't know then, which is he's under audit and what that means. And he has said very clearly, and I back him up completely, that when the audit is completed, he will release the tax returns. And let me just say something about transparency. It comes in many different forms, Dana, as does accountability, and as does truthfulness. And we can't imagine going up against a less transparent, less accountable, more sort of rigged and corrupt individual as our political opponent than Hillary Clinton. She's had a terrible week when it comes to being transparent and accountable, whether it's the revelations of the pay for play in the State Department that I know that CNN is very much on top of, and your reporting is, Dana, as well as what happened at the Clinton Foundation, which is a big hot mess.
And we are talking about that for sure. But in this particular interview, and these questions are about Donald Trump. And you mentioned the audit. According to his lawyers, the years 2002 to 2008 are no longer under audit. So would you release those tax returns?
No.
No, I would not. And this entire tax return debate is somewhat confounding to me in the following sense.
She just doesn't get why people want this. Well, the reason people want the tax returns is the same reason you wanted them a couple months ago, right? I mean, there could be so much in there. Being under audit doesn't prevent you from releasing your tax returns. But more importantly, everybody knew Trump was saying he was under audit and that's why he wasn't releasing them. How did it take her becoming part of his campaign to learn that? He's been saying that for years. And let me also add, it usually takes a little while for the IRS to audit you. The odds that Trump's 2015 tax returns are under audit are almost it's almost non-existent probability.
Mm-hmm. I almost feel bad for her that she was caught earlier saying that on video.
Yeah.
And someone like her doing so many appearances, it's hard to keep track of what you say.
Sure.
I get it. And it's hilarious.
Basically, what Kellyanne is saying is, I'm on Trump's payroll now. You don't want me getting fired, do you? Or maybe what she means is, and this is, I think, actually even more likely, now that I'm on the inside and I've talked to people on the campaign, I know why Trump absolutely cannot release those tax returns because they would be so devastating compared to just continuing to not release them. And that's really what I think is going on here. Send me your thoughts on this. We will take a break and be back with more right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The pace of police shootings in 2016 has accelerated somewhat. We've heard about Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile. These names are all fresh in our minds and people's memories, and the questionable circumstances of some of these shootings are also in our minds. Fatal police shootings of unarmed suspects caught on video over the last couple of years have obviously sparked new outrage and debate in the U.S. over race and police use of force. Many claim that black people are disproportionately being affected by police use of force. Others disagree. But data about police interactions and suspect race isn't as easy to come by as it should be, because many police departments are unwilling or even unable to provide it. And right now, the federal government, in most cases, essentially cannot require local police departments to supply this type of information. And many police departments don't even keep records about use of force during interactions with suspects, often citing a lack of resources. Even many pro-civil rights think tanks, like the Center for Policing Equity, acknowledge that there haven't been large enough compilations of data to determine whether or not racial biases exist in fatal shootings or policing in general on a national scale. Without question, there have been individual studies conducted on specific jurisdictions throughout the U.S. that have brought to light some pretty convincing evidence of racial prejudice locally, such as the recent inquest of the policing patterns in San Francisco after officers were found sending tons of racist text messages to one another. But as far as trying to figure out if racial bias by police exists today throughout the country as a whole, there is still a scarcity of data, and this prevents us from coming to meaningful, generalized conclusions.
The energy behind the Black Lives Matter movement, just stop killing us. Behind the movement lies the presumption that race is factoring causally in the police officers' decision to use deadly force in their encounters with citizens. That, in effect, the counterfactual that's being entertained is, if this person had been white, they wouldn't have been killed. Now, as a social scientist, I recognize that question. No one will ever live in the parallel universe in which the suspects in these particular instances were, by an experimenter, sometimes black, sometimes white. We don't have good data to draw statistical conclusions, but we do have the recordings on the cell phones of particular incidences. 1,000 people are killed by the police in this country every year. 1,000. We have a dozen videos, anecdotes, sensationalized cases. Perhaps the most egregious cases are the only ones that come to our attention. Should we have a national narrative leading to large demonstrations in dozens of cities across the country, leading in some instances to violent retaliatory actions? I'm not blaming that on the movement. I'm just saying it happens, driven by anecdotes.
Let's begin by breaking down the numbers with regard to what is probably the most controversial and frequently discussed issue right now about police and race: black people being shot and killed by police, and how those numbers compare to how often white people are being shot and killed by police. Many people who criticize Black Lives Matter often point out that there are far more white people being shot and killed by police than black people, and this is true. In 2015, almost twice as many white people were killed by police than black people. But obviously, since white people are the majority in the US and black people are a minority, we need to take into account the racial and ethnic makeup of the US. Black people make up 13% of the population, but they constitute 24% of fatal police shootings. Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed by police than white people. And with this adjustment, it may seem that the black community are victims of obvious bias or racism in police shootings. But another factor to consider is how often each race is interacting with and being arrested by police. If a demographic is being stopped, arrested, and convicted of violent crimes at a higher rate, then we can expect that the rate of being killed by police will be higher. Obviously, black people do not commit more crime because they are black. Whether or not someone lives in poverty is a much better indicator of someone's likelihood to commit crime than his or her race. White people commit more crime when under the same adverse circumstances: poverty, poor schools, poor job opportunities, homogeneity of poverty within a given geographical area, lacking social safety nets, as well as histories of political oppression. We must also consider that profiling and other racial biases by police are also definitely a reality in the U.S., but unfortunately in the U.S., black people are disproportionately affected by these historical and economic disadvantages, and they do commit more crime than white people in general. Based on the most recent available Justice Department statistics, black people make up over 28% of all arrests in the U.S. They make up 39% of arrests for violent crimes, 49% of arrests for murder, 34% of arrests for illegal weapon possession, 34% of aggravated assaults, and they make up 55% of arrests for robbery. So, black people are 13% of the population, they make up 28% of all arrests, and they make up even higher portions of violent and weapons-related arrests. But they make up 24% of those shot and killed by police. We recently discussed on the show a study by a black Harvard economist, Roland Fryer, which indicated that there is no racial bias when it comes to fatal police shootings in the U.S. It actually concluded that black people are less likely to be shot and killed by police than white people in proportion to how often they interact with police and are suspected of crimes. The study took into account a number of important factors when looking at individual confrontations between suspects and police, including the age of the suspect, whether or not they suffered from mental illness, what crime or crimes the person was suspected of, whether the officer fired his weapon before or after the suspect became aggressive, and the race of officers involved, as well as other pertinent factors. And still, no evidence could be found that black people are disproportionately more often the victims of police shootings relative to the rate at which they interact with police. However, we also mentioned on the show that this study wasn't as comprehensive as it could have been, and that more and more data that is less self-selected is necessary in order to really have a complete picture of police shootings and race throughout the country as a whole. Results of other studies have suggested the presence of racial bias when looking at more specific parameters, which we will do now. A recent study by the University of South Carolina and the University of Louisville, using 2015 data collected by the Washington Post, shows that there might be racial bias when it comes to unarmed suspects who were shot. The study determined that a black person shot and killed by an officer is almost twice as likely to be unarmed than a white person who is fatally shot by police. Black and white crime rates have no bearing on these statistics. We're talking about what happens once the officer and the suspect are already in an altercation. Not only did they find that black people fatally shot by police are more likely to be unarmed, they determined that unarmed black people shot and killed by police are in fact less likely than white people to be posing a threat to police during the altercation. One of the authors of the study, criminal justice researcher Justin Nix, said, quote, "The only thing that was significant in predicting whether someone shot and killed by police was unarmed was whether or not they were black. Crime variables did not matter in terms of predicting whether the person killed was unarmed." An analogous study finished late last year by University of California, Davis, using similar methodology and data from 2011 to 2014, found an even bigger disparity between the likelihoods of black and white people being shot and killed while unarmed. It found that black people were 3.5 times more likely to be killed by police when unarmed between 2011 and 2014. Let's talk about police use of force. Information about deadly police interactions are an important metric by which we can gauge racial bias by police. But what about all types of use of force by officers, whether the suspect was killed or not? A 3-year study of 19,000 police interactions between 2010 and 2015 from across the country found that while only 2% of police interactions led to any type of use of force, force is being used on black people at over 3 times the rate that force is being used on white people. This applied to every type of force: hand-to-hand altercations, use of a nightstick, pepper spray, police dog attacks, tasers, and gunfire. As I mentioned, there are a lot of up-to-date studies of individual local police departments that suggest racial bias. A July of 2016 report by the San Francisco District Attorney's Office that sought to probe the practices of the SFPD had some disconcerting findings regarding the treatment of black people. The city collaborated with Stanford University and 4 other law schools and found unexplainable disparities in the rate at which black people are stopped, searched, and arrested when all relevant variables were factored out. There was no observable reason in the data as to why black people in San Francisco were being targeted at such higher rates. It also determined that this problem has been getting worse over time in the city. Like I said, the study was conducted after a number of SFPD officers were discovered to have been exchanging racist text messages. Quote, "Although black people accounted for less than 15% of all stops in 2015, they accounted for over 42% of all non-consent searches following stops." Quote, "Of all people searched without consent, black and Hispanic people had the lowest rate of contraband recovered." After the shooting of Michael Brown, the U.S. Justice Department's investigation of police in Ferguson, Missouri, uncovered, quote, "a pattern or practice of unlawful conduct within the Ferguson Police Department that violates the First, Fourth, and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution and federal statutory law." The report discovered that Ferguson police were discernibly pulling over and searching black people at a rate that is disproportionate to how often they were finding contraband on black people. In 2016, the Police Accountability Task Force in Chicago released a report finding that, quote, "black and Hispanic drivers were searched approximately 4 times as often as white drivers, yet the Chicago Police Department's own data showed that contraband was found on white drivers twice as often as black and Hispanic drivers." Lastly, a 2015 investigation by the New York Times into the practices of the Greensboro, North Carolina Police Department found that, quote, "officers were more likely to stop black drivers for no discernible reason, and they were more likely to use force if the driver was black, even when they did not encounter physical resistance." So there is, unfortunately, a lack of coalescence in the data from which we can currently draw larger, overarching conclusions about whether or not and to what degree there's racial bias in police shootings in general throughout the entire United States. But there are some seemingly reliable and comprehensive studies that have just come out inferring that racial imbalances do most likely exist when measuring specific criteria. And there are definitely definitive sets of proof within individual jurisdictions of racism. Black Lives Matter may be jumping the gun in their ability to make certain specific claims about police shootings, such as that fatal police shootings are 100% in every respect, without a doubt, unfairly affecting black people. One of the central demands of Black Lives Matter is for more accountability and transparency within police departments and for them to more consistently report this type of information to higher government. And the availability of this data might in fact confirm those suspicions, but this is exactly what we need. I don't think that more discoveries of racial bias by police throughout the country as a whole would surprise many progressives, but we're never going to know for sure until local police are given the resources and the mandate to collect the data. Body cameras, mandatory reports after physical altercations, breakdowns of policing by racial lines, better data infrastructures to track everything locally, and how about more involvement by the Justice Department? These are crucially necessary steps that must be taken if we want a complete picture of how the people of the U.S. are being treated by police in relation to their race. As incomplete as the national data may be now, there are definitely plenty of disturbing insights that we can draw from the solid evidence that already exists. It's important to know what else we may find if we had more information to delve into. The current anti-police violence movements may be totally right about sweeping claims they make, and as we've discussed here, we know that they're almost certainly correct in some cases. And it goes without saying that the shootings of unarmed suspects that are found to be unjustified are deplorable, like many of those that have received national attention after being caught on camera. But we need more data and more studies to really have a complete picture going forward regarding how much racial bias there is and to what scale it exists.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
At least a few victims of the Louisiana flooding seemed thrilled to see Donald Trump show up there with Mike Pence in Louisiana. They acted like Trump was actually doing something to make a difference. And here's people saying, "We knew you'd be here, Donald. Take a look."
Here, guys, let's stay together. We're gonna get lost in the scrum. We knew you would be here for us.
Well, yeah, he's not going to miss an opportunity for just a blatant pandering photo op. Anybody could have predicted Trump was going to show up there.
Yeah, and so, mission accomplished. It worked.
So then Trump, well, before I get to the video of Trump, quote, helping, I'll show you, this is a guy who teared up at Trump showing up in his private plane with a Make America Great Again hat.
To Donald Trump, what'd you tell him?
Well, I wasn't really able to tell him anything. I said, give me a minute. If he can give me a minute, I can give him 4 or 5 hours. But he didn't give me a minute yet. But hopefully one day he will. If he sees this, call me.
Are you happy that he came here?
Oh, yes, sir. Most blessed with it. Yeah, doubt. No, Donald Trump all the way. Everybody.
What did you lose, and what does it mean to have Donald Trump here?
Let's see.
Yeah.
I didn't lose anything compared to what a lot of people lost. I'm okay. It's materialistic things. They can be replaced.
And having Trump here, did that mean a lot to you?
Oh, yes, yes. Because, hell, America's got to wake up.
Right. So here is the big photo op Trump spending basically 45 seconds handing out items, just helping to move items off of the back of a truck and into someone else's hands. And this is the entire thing. This is Trump helping. Take a look.
Got it? Whoops. We got to hand off. Here you go, Billy. I need right here on this side. Excuse me. I need someone on
A lot of work Trump is doing there, huh? He is absolutely moving boxes of supplies.
I think he's starting to break a sweat.
Yeah. Very somber and serious Donald Trump showing up here. Yeah.
God, that's awesome.
So anyway, I don't know. I mean, is that helping? I've seen so many people posting about how Trump is helping. The guy is in a suit wearing a Make America Great Again hat. How much help do you really think he's doing in flood recovery? What about writing a check, Donald? But that's really been the problem for Trump, right? He talks a lot about the charity contributions he makes. Washington Post investigation turned up that he actually maybe at most had donated $10,000, a tiny, tiny seedling of a fraction of what he claimed to have donated. That's really what he could have done, written a check.
You'd think with all the money he saved by not paying people who worked for him, he could be more generous with charity. Well, he is helping by definition.
In the literal sense, yeah. I guess he did help for a few minutes there. Right-wingers, Jason, are furious because, Obama's on vacation during this time. He's not doing anything. First of all, presidents can work from anywhere. Bush was on vacation during any number of train wrecks and disasters that took place, and you didn't hear the Republicans criticizing him for that. But President Obama did actually declare a disaster. He issued a disaster declaration, which allows Louisiana and people in Louisiana to apply for federal aid. Isn't that such a flaccid criticism? Well, where is Obama? He's vacationing. Trump is here with his suit passing around soap.
Well, I'm sure Obama is actually doing more by not being there and actually like communicating with people and setting up organizations to get things done. And Donald Trump just shows up and moves a box from side to side.
Write a check, Donald. That's
it's not a photo op for Obama.
Yeah, that's exactly right. President Obama is not taking this as an opportunity to be photographed holding soap boxes. Speaking of the flooding in Louisiana, we now know that flooding has killed 13 people at minimum. It has damaged at least 60,000 homes across 20 parishes. We have more video from member Roland Spano Jr., longtime member, who has been working in rescue efforts, and he actually drove around and showed us, gave us sort of a tour of the horrific devastation. Take a look at.
All right, David, this is what disaster recovery looks like. This is in Livingston Parish, Dillon Springs. Was helping my brother-in-law recover stuff today. So this entire neighborhood experienced flooding here. Most people had between 2.5 to 4 feet of water in the house.
So just so much stuff stacked up everywhere there. Trash and devastation. We're learning a lot more. Not all of the areas affected required flood insurance. So we talked about areas that should have had flood insurance but didn't. Some of the affected areas, and this really gets to us talking about climate change and how sea level rise and so many other issues are going to have a systemic long-term impact here. Some of these areas were not even considered so at risk that flood insurance was required.
Yeah, that's going to be an increasingly common problem, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's sad, and watch out. It's unfortunately not something you should have to consider, but if you live near the coast, be careful.
And many of the climate deniers often refuse to even accept the impact of this, saying, well, we can just move inland or whatever, and that's not going to be a big deal. Well, this is also affecting food supply because the high water in Louisiana and in Arkansas have really hurt the country's rice harvest. Much of the Louisiana crop was harvested before the flood, but not all. In Arkansas, farmers had just started harvesting before the rainy weather began, and now the flooding has really damaged. So farmers are losing out, and this is why people who believe that they're siloed, I'm in the middle of the country, and I don't care about people on the coast or just inland of the coast. If that next becomes the coastal area, once the actual current coasts are underwater, I don't care. Well, we're talking about food supply. And then, of course, if food supply is damaged, the income of those farmers will be affected. They'll have less money to go out and buy tractors and machinery. For people, Jason, who say, not my problem, it's not going to affect me, it's such a naive way to look at the issue of climate change.
I think it plays perfectly into Trump's new platform. It can't get any worse.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the way that, and unfortunately, the thing is, people aren't actually connecting what's going on in indifference to climate change to what we see and weather and climate are separate, but broader changes in climate will exacerbate extremes in terms of individual weather events. I don't know. I mean, people, it's at this point, if you're still denying what is going on, I don't know that there's going to be any science that is going to convince you otherwise.
Probably not. And maybe you're not even a denier, but it's just hard for you to see the bigger picture and how this affects everyone and everything.
On the bonus show today, Lewis is questioning some viral online videos. We will talk about some defective military helmets made by inmate labor. And we will also talk about ramen noodles replacing tobacco as the currency of choice in some American prisons. Those stories and more on today's bonus show. Only one way to sign up for the bonus show. Get instant access by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Patriot40 as a coupon code. Patriot40 will still get you a 40% discount.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.